Niches, huh? Yeah, oh, yeah, you're all funny. All right, take your Bibles, turn to, I keep wanting to say Ammon because it's mentioned, Amos. Amos. Turn to the book of Amos. We're going to do 2 chapters tonight, just because both chapters are fairly similar. So we'll read the 2 chapters here out of Amos, chapter 1 and chapter number 2. Take some thoughts, and then afterwards, once the live stream's off, I have a 1 minute, just a minute video from the Vanderspecs from when we were over there. I just can't do it while the live stream's on because it messes up the system to watch the video and the live stream. So right before we go to prayer, there's a little one update from the Vanderspecs. Amos chapter number 1, find it. We're going to read 2 chapters here. So just pay attention, tune in for just a few moments, and we'll take some feedback and some thoughts here out of this chapter. Amos 1 verse 1 says, "The words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. And he said, the Lord will roar from Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the inhabitants of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. But I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, which shall devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. I will break also the bar of Damascus, and cut off the inhabitant from the plain of Avon, and him that holdeth the scepter from the house of Eden, and the people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kir, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof, and I will cut off the inhabitants from Ashdod, and from him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon, and I will turn mine hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyrus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant. But I will send a fire on the wall of Tyrus, which shall devour the palaces thereof. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. But I will send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the palaces of Bozrah. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have ripped up the women with child of Gilead, and that they might enlarge their border. But I will kindle a fire in the wall of Rabbah, and it shall devour the palaces thereof, and with shouting in the day of the battle, with a tempest in the day of whirlwind, and their king shall go into captivity, and he and his princes together, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. But I will send a fire upon Moab, and it shall devour the palaces of Kirioth, and Moab shall die with tumult, with shouting, and with the sound of the trumpet. And I will cut off the judges from the midst thereof, and will slay all the princes thereof with him, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, and I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have despised the law of the Lord, and have not kept the commandments, and their lies cause them to err, after the which their fathers have walked. But I will send a fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes. They pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek. And a man and his father will go in unto the same maid to profane my holy name. And they lay themselves down upon clothes laid to pledge by every altar. And they drink the wine of the condemned in the house of their God. Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath. Also, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up of your sons for your prophets and your young men for Nazarites. Is it not even thus, O you children of Israel, saith the Lord? But ye gave the Nazarites wine to drink and commanded the prophets, saying, Prophesy not. Behold, I am pressed under you, as a cart is pressed that is full of sheaves. Therefore the flight shall perish from the swift, and the strong shall not strengthen his force, neither shall the mighty deliver himself, neither shall he stand that handleth the bow, and he that is swift of foot shall not deliver himself, neither shall he that rideth the horse deliver himself, and he that is courageous among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, saith the Lord. It's just the start of the prophecy of Amos, the herdsman from Tekoa. Any thoughts while the screen is getting pulled up here just in a minute? Yeah. Yeah. If you look at this as well, while the connection to Israel, as you say, if it's pulled up on the screen, it is. These are the kingdoms that are mentioned here. So the first one being Damascus, top right, is the kingdom of Damascus, which is Syria, which is where Paul was on the road to Damascus when Jesus met him on the way. But that's in the top right, Damascus, Syria. Syria is up there. North of Syria is Assyria and the Assyrians. So don't confuse Syria and the Assyrians in the Bible. Damascus is of Syria. Hamel and Ben-Hadad were kings there in Syria. So Damascus is made mention of, and it says that they came and, it says here in verse 3 of chapter 1, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. Gilead is on the right-hand side, the eastern side of the Jordan River, and it was for the tribe of, can't remember now, the ones that didn't come in because it was the good pasture and they stayed up there. Anyway, that's Gilead up there, and so they have come down and they're expanding their borders into Israel, and they have threshed them and killed them, and there's a judgment there. So the Syrians. The next one you find in verse 6 is Gaza. Now Gaza is famous today for the Gaza Strip. That is the Philistines. The Philistines are over by the coast. The red is where the Philistines are. Jerusalem there in the red, to the right of the red is the star, and then to the west of that is where the battle, the Valley of Elah. Is the Valley of Elah that David fought Goliath? That's down there because the Philistines are over in that particular one. Ashkelon, the cities that are mentioned there, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ekron, those are the cities of the Philistines. So they're mentioned, they're over there in that section. The Edomites, the kingdom of the Edomites, which is down there in the yellow, modern day Jordan, they say. Petra Jordan is the old inhabitants of the Edomites. The Edomites are descendants of Esau, so Jacob and Esau. So that's where they ended up settling, and Esau went south after the spat with the brother, and the kingdom of Edom is down there, and there's judgment there. Verse 13, the Ammonites. The Ammonites there in orange are the kingdom of the Ammonites over there to the west, and they are made mention of. And then you have the Moabites, and the Moabites are right there on the other side of the Dead Sea, in the purple there with the kingdom of the Moabites. So when you hear these names mentioned a lot, they are the neighbors around Israel, and then Egypt further down there. And that's where they say, I will take you captive beyond Damascus, beyond just your neighboring border. I'm going to take you captive beyond Damascus, meaning you're going to be taken away to Babylon and taken away to Nineveh where the Assyrians were and taken away to Babylon. So when these names are mentioned, absolutely, as Cornelius is right on the money, they are connected to Israel, what they've done to Israel, and how they've acted there, and they are symbolic of the nations of the world, as they are right there. So you can see that map and why the prophecy is. And then, does God care as much about those nations? He does, but he's actually zeroing in on the center, and his bullseye target, though, is Judah and then Israel. That's his bullseye. And he goes all the way around it to go, bam, here. And then he comes back to Judah in chapter 2, verse 4, and verse number 6 as well, then to Israel. Any other observations out of this? The earthquake. Yeah, famous earthquake. It's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible as well. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That verse in Zechariah is about when Jesus comes again and stands on the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split the Mount of Olives. And if you read the end of Ezekiel, there's water going to flow from the Temple Mount, flow towards the Dead Sea. So if you see Jordan there, and on the right-hand side, that body of water is the Dead Sea. It's the lowest part on earth. It's where it's very salty, nothing lives there. You can float and all the stuff about the Dead Sea. Well, there's going to be water. That earthquake's going to split, bring water, and the Dead Sea is going to come to life. And it says there's going to be great fish in the Dead Sea, like as in the Great Sea. They're going to pull out big fish out of that Dead Sea. It's no longer going to be the Dead Sea. It's going to bring it back to life. And he says the fishermen are going to cast their nets, and they're going to be fishing in that sea. From that earthquake, when Jesus comes again, and comes and stands upon the Mount of Olives, which is where Jesus left from. He left from the Mount of Olives. He comes back to the Mount of Olives. And he says that earthquake, what was so symbolic, whatever earthquake that takes place in the days of Amos, 200 years later, when Zechariah is prophesying, about 200 years later, they are still referring back to the earthquake that happens here in the days of Uzziah that Amos has had. So we don't know any more about it, apart from it was a colossal event that was spoken about for multiple generations afterwards. 200 years, they were saying, man, the earthquake in Uzziah's day. And he says, right, just like that, as Cole was right, just as you fled then, you will flee again when this earthquake comes, when Jesus comes again. And there will be a shaking. Cole for round 2. If that's what it says, then it's right. Yeah. Yeah. And the 3 transgressions and for 4, from what I was reading, that's not saying, right, okay, you've all finally reached the 4 transgression threshold. It's like saying, no, for 3, for 4, like it's not actually, it's like the number is just continuing on, is what he's meaning by that. They are full up with their transgressions. And it says here in this, verse 16, and he that is courageous, chapter 2, he that is courageous among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, saith the Lord. That day, I think, is another way of saying the day of the Lord. The day when God judges. And he judged them. The day of the Lord isn't necessarily, from what I'm understanding, isn't just one particular day. There was the day of the Lord in Joel was when the locusts came. That was the judgment in the day of the Lord, judging. And then when Nebuchadnezzar came, the day of the Lord was the judgment that is enacted here, that Nebuchadnezzar brings about these judgments and burns these places with fire. That was the day of the Lord, but it yet points on to yet another greater day of the Lord. And every day of the Lord becomes greater, to the very point that every man stands before God, with God having the gavel of eternal judgment in his hand, and he comes down, and that day where its soul is eternally lost is even greater than all these other days of the Lord when God's judgment is enacted and destruction is brought. But that day, still the day of the Lord, is mentioned here. One thing that I'll just mention here with sake of time is chapter 1, verse 11. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom. So we're talking about the descendants of Esau. Wednesday night crowd knows the Bible probably better than most. Knows the animosity between those two brothers, Jacob and Esau, and what Jacob did against Esau back in the day when they were brothers in the household, and the bitterness that resulted from that. And though they sort of reconciled, and we'd say, oh, Jacob came back and they wept and they seemed to get things right, but the Bible says here that they didn't really get it right. And there was animosity between the Edomites and the Israelites all their days, to the point that he says, because he did pursue his brother with the sword and did cast off all pity. And Obadiah, we're going to come to, is from the Edomites and their lack of pity towards Israel. They were actually just looking for the day for Israel to be wiped out. They hated him so much that nothing pleased the Edomites more than to see Israel suffer. And so he says here, they had no pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. I find that such a striking statement, because here they are. I don't actually know that, I should have looked this up, but the amount of time between Jacob and Esau was 400 years in Israel, 400 years of judges, 400 years of the kings. So we're talking about 1,000 years has gone by. That's a pretty long time to hold a grudge. But 1,000 years has gone by, and the descendants 1,000 years later are just as bitter as the original conflict. In fact, it's probably even stronger. And to think that your bitterness dies when you die is not true. You pass your bitterness on to your children, and then they will pass your bitterness on to their children, and their grandchildren will pass your bitterness on to the great-grandchildren, and on it goes until it just becomes part of the national psyche to be angry with these people and bitter against them for something that happened generations previously that really has no bearing upon them on that day, and it could easily be rectified with some grace and some charity. And I've seen it in churches where families will pass on bitterness to their children, and I've seen it where even the grandchildren have the bitterness passed on to them. That's terrible. Don't be wary of bitterness. It springs up in all of us at times, and we are told to be wary of it and to be cautious of it, and lest any root of bitterness defile us, whereby many are defiled, and it will pass on to your children. Don't think your bitterness will die with you. Your children will carry it on. Man, what a terrible thing to pass on to your children. The best thing to do is to nip it in the bud, as they say. Cut it off before it blossoms and blooms. And I'm telling you what, if you're alive and you have bitterness, get it right. Get it right, and you might then have a chance to arrest the slide that might take place in your family if you don't get it right. And here is a testimony of 1,000 years of bitterness between the Edomites and the Jews because of conflicts generations previous that are now being passed on. Bitterness is ugly and rooted out at every state in your life. Don't let it grow. It will grow and it'll choke out the very spiritual life out of you, and we are warned against it. Let's find a no. Let's do this before we find a prayer partner or two.